Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. We've got a fun one here for you today. This is part 2 in our Fremo build series, and this video is about 2 months in the making. So there's quite a bit of footage compiled here, lots and lots of progress. So without further ado, let's dive right in. Alright, so first things first, what we're looking at here is just my efforts to kind of even out the surface of the foam. Unfortunately, there are just a couple of little high spots that we had to deal with, and I used just a 150 grit sandpaper, knocked down the high spots. There were some low spots as well, filled those in with some lightweight spackle, and from there was really able to dive into some much more detailed work on the rest of the layout. So here's just a quick look at me cutting out the creek scene that's going to be part of Module A. It took me a little bit to kind of plan this to look right, and as you'll see in a little bit, I still did not plan correctly. First step was to get the side frames of the module itself cut away, and then once that was done, I was able to go back in on the top of the module with jigsaw and cut at a 45-degree angle and kind of cut in a nice meandering creek into the module itself. Didn't want this to seem like a really straight section of creek. Right in this prototype area, the creek actually takes a 90-degree turn just north of the bridge, so I wanted to try to do my best to make it look like the creek itself was meandering a little bit as I went along. Well, you know, as they say, 1 step forward, 2 steps back. Unfortunately, the width of the plywood I put in underneath the creek scene did not end up being wide enough. And that was kind of poor planning on my part. The bridge itself is a 15-inch bridge, and the piece of plywood I put in is 12 inches. So it worked for most of the creek bed, but at its widest point where the bridge is going to be, unfortunately, I did not cut it wide enough. So at least it's a pretty simple fix. I just pulled the piece out and replaced it with another wider piece of plywood. And as you'll see in the next scene, it took me just a second to do. Didn't even bother recording it just because, well, number one, I was a little frustrated, but all's well that ends well. So between the last scene and this one, quite a bit of time elapsed, and that's just because I was waiting on some assistance from some fellow club members at GSME to build the template that we have here in the frame, this piece of hardwood. The template is being used for the pilot holes for the alignment dowels that we're putting in. And we installed some alignment dowels on the club modules first, and then I took the template home here. You can see those green holes are the holes that we're using in order to drill our pilot holes using a 5.5mm drill bit. And then here are the dowels we're using themselves. I bought them from a place called Woodcraft online, and they seem to work pretty well. They're just nice metal dowels used really for table leaf extensions, so they're made to be able to take apart and put back together relatively easily, which is really nice. They get a nice, pretty good alignment every single time you put them together and bring them back apart. And overall, really thinking that these are going to be really helpful in the alignment process. So here we have the jig installed using a C-clamp, and then just using that 5.5mm drill bit in order to drill out the pilot holes. The nice thing about the jig here is that it is ensuring that every single hole that we put in is being put in square, which is super important when you're working with these alignment dowels. Want to make sure every single hole is square so that when they meet up with the next module in line, there's no issues with the track alignment at all, and everything is a nice flush fit. Now it's time to get into the nitty-gritty of this whole process. First, I had to clamp the module that had the pilot holes drilled together with the next module in line, so that's A to B as far as the sections are concerned, and continue the pilot hole through to the B module in line. And then once that process was done, things get a little bit more complicated. We need to now expand the holes out to 8mm in order to fit the alignment dowels themselves. But we don't want to go too far with the 8mm hole, because if you do, you allow the alignment dowel itself to go too far into the module. So in order to prevent that from happening, what I'm going to do is use just a small piece of electrical tape on the drill bit itself as a sort of stopping device. I'm going to kind of measure out the length of the dowel itself so that I make sure the holes that I'm drilling next are going to be perfectly the length of the dowels themselves. So with that process out of the way, it was time to start installing the alignment dowels themselves. And that process is also just a little bit unique. You can see I struggled a little bit just because this ping pong table is not actually flat. So that was a bit of a struggle, but also you don't want to just hammer these things in. In order to get the best flushest fit possible, you actually really want to just kind of clamp right over top of each of the alignment dowels and then slowly add pressure to each of the dowels themselves and kind of allow them to align themselves as they are getting pressed into place. And that's the process that I'm doing here. And it seemed to work out really well. I put these modules down on the floor as soon as I was done, and everything seems to be really well aligned. Still had a bunch more modules to go here, so I figured let's jump into a time lapse. Really quickly, as you can see here, speedily went through the rest of the alignment dowel process and then got all of the legs on the modules so that I could set them up for the first time together. So the next step up, once everything was set up, was a quick coat of latex paint. I used the same color brown I used for my main layout, and it just gives you a good dirt tone for anything underneath the scenery, and really just is used to protect the foam itself from the next steps. You want to make sure that the foam is protected from any scenery or glues that you're going to be using as you lay track. Once that was done, I quickly got to work just kind of putting together my entire track plan one-to-one so that I could get a good idea of how I needed to cut out my experimental plywood roadbed. And I went to work taping it all together, got it all kind of pretty much together, cut it out close to the tracks, and then traced out the lines themselves on the plywood. Then I brought the plywood out to the garage and got it all cut down to size using a jigsaw, and then put a 45-degree chamfer on it using a router, and pretty much it's good to go from there. I'm really happy with how this turned out. Still got just a little bit more work to do before we're ready to lay track, mostly just a layer of clear coat on the plywood itself just to give it some protection, and need to pre-drill some holes for the tortoise switch machines where those turnouts are going to stand. Just a little bit more work done after gluing down the plywood itself, some of which you can kind of see here in this frame. This is the bridge over the Tonawanda Creek. I had to get the abutments cut down to size, make sure that the roadbed was going to be flush as it went across the bridge, and then I started to mock up the track itself just to make sure that my alignment was going to be good. I had a little bit of modification to do there. It was a bit of a challenge to really make sure that the tracks were going to be aligned, but everything looks good now. I also had to retrofit the Walthers bridge track with my Pico flex track. So it's one contiguous piece all the way from where the locomotive is sitting there all the way back to where that weight is sitting on the piece of plywood roadbed that's being glued down at the moment. I think this is going to allow for kind of the smoothest operation through the bridge, since there is not a single joint between the turnout, the end of the module itself. So hopefully nice smooth operation there. I'm really happy with how the bridge is sitting as well. Got the abutments nice and flush, and everything's looking really, really good here. I'm looking forward to not just having track mocked up here, but finally officially kind of put in place and there to stay. But that is about it for this one, everybody. Once again, thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Freemo Build series. We got a ton of stuff done, and really am looking forward to almost being ready to lay track and get trains running. And if you're excited to see that point on this channel as well. Make sure that you hit the subscribe button if you're new. Also, if you would be so kind as to leave a like, that would sure help out a lot as well. And let me know what you think down in the comment section. This is my first time building Fremo modules, so I'm always open to new suggestions. I am trying some new things here, which I understand are not conventional, so there might be some people that want to make us think about the plywood roadbed and that sort of thing, and the use of foam, and I'll take those comments, but don't expect me to absolutely act on them, because I'm trying something new here. We'll see what works and what doesn't. But anyway, guys, thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you in the next video. Take care, everybody.